The Sabarimala verdict of the Supreme Court that refers the issue now to a larger 7-member bench has effectively put a stay on the Supreme Court's earlier decision to allow women devotees of a certain age into the Sabarimala shrine. With this decision, the Supreme Court, I'm afraid, has failed to stand by its own verdict. It has let itself down, and it has also let down Indian women. Let me explain why I feel this as strongly and as passionately as I do. We are telling women in 2019 that you can train to be fighter jet pilots, you can be the CEOs of companies, you can be soldiers who go into conflict zones and fight terrorism. You can be anything you want. Isn't that what we tell our daughters? But if you bleed, as we all do every month, at least up to a certain age, then we will still be considered impure, and we will be considered a distraction, and we will be asked to stay away from certain places of worship. In this case, of course, the tradition has it that Lord Ayyappa is a celibate god, and therefore women of a menstruating age should be kept away. How do we reconcile this with any principle of equality, modernity, and fair play? Part of the problem is how the Supreme Court framed its earlier decision to begin with. At that time, the Chief Justice was Deepak Mishra, and it was him leading a bench that decided in favor of women being allowed entry into the Sabarimala shrine. But the mistake that the Supreme Court made was how it framed its decision. Faced with competing fundamental rights, Article 14 that promises the right to equality for all citizens, and Article 25 that promises the freedom of religion and the right to practice it in the way that we choose, the Supreme Court decided that the devotees of Lord Ayyappa are not a separate religious denomination, and the exclusion of women is not an essential religious practice. They followed the same principle, in fact, while striking down triple talaq. Then too they argued that triple talaq was not an essential tenet of Islam. Now the problem with this approach is that tomorrow you could come across a tenet which is upheld by the faith, and the faith will argue that this is an essential principle, but that essential principle could still contradict the equality between men and women. And what are you going to do then? To that extent, the Supreme Court perhaps walked into a trap of its own making. Now I want to ask all those who support a uniform civil code, and by the way, I am one of them. How do you reconcile your support for a uniform civil code with your opposition to women entering the Sabarimala shrine? Here's why I support a uniform civil code, a progressive uniform civil code. It's because I believe that the religious orthodoxies of all faiths, whether it's Hinduism or it's Islam or it's Christianity or it's any other faith, militate against equality for women. And their modern day custodians or interpreters are resistant to change. They have failed to remain dynamic and keep pace with a changing society. So if you support a uniform civil code and you do not want personal laws to influence notions of equality, how can you ask for a uniform civil code but not want women to enter the Sabarimala shrine? And remember, this is not about one faith, it's not about one practice. As Chief Justice Ranjan Gogoi observed today, what the Supreme Court has decided today will have impact on the fights of other women in other religious communities. For example, Muslim women fighting for the right of entry to all mosques, or Bohri women who are leading a brave campaign against female genital cutting. In fact, I want to play for you a small clip of what this female genital cutting is all about. Children as young as 7 years old are sometimes taken by their grandmothers to go through this horrific procedure, and now finally they're breaking the silence. Listen in.
I was of age 7 when my grandmother told me that we're going out to get chocolates and we're just going to have fun, and she wants to take me along with her. And she was lying to me. I was lied to and taken to a dark, dingy building with a really dimly lit room. And there was a lady waiting there for us. So once we reach there, she tells me to sit down, lie down and spread my legs. And I was just 7, right? This happens to most of us when we're 7 years old, and it's kind of strange for a kid to do that. But obviously my consent wasn't taken into account. So yeah, my grandmother was there and she was watching. She's just there and she was watching while this lady told me to lie down and spread my legs. She took off my panties um, and then she told me to not worry and that it wouldn't pain. Just stay still and do not worry. That wouldn't hurt and it would get over really soon. And then it happened. She nicked my clitoris and it was really painful. And I remember it till this day. And I couldn't do anything about it. I was just there. I had to go through that whole process. And after that was done, she just put this red antiseptic, which was really unhygienic and nothing like, what hospitals provide. Very like housely stuff, and midwives do it. It's not actually medical. No medical instruments. They just use a blade and they nick you. So after that was done, my grandmother finally took me back, and yeah, I was finally given my chocolate that I was promised. So when we went back, it was painful, and
The reason I played this clip is to make the point that often it is women who are perpetrating some of these customs. Even in the Sabarimala context, when we stand up and say women must be allowed to enter the shrine, we're told, but women devotees do not support this change. Now here's the fact. Misogyny and feminism are both gender neutral. Women can be as patriarchal. Women are in effect socialized by the same traditions, by the same orthodoxies. So take female genital cutting, for instance, where women are often at the forefront of perpetrating it, but women are also at the forefront of change. With this decision by the Supreme Court today, we have also set back the fight for women in other communities. Parsi women, Muslim women, Christian women, Bohri women. This is setting all women back. And there may be many of you who do not agree with me. In fact, the upholding of this orthodoxy has gone well beyond any particular party. Almost all parties in Kerala are united in not accepting that women should be allowed to enter the Sabarimala shrine. But think about it for a moment. What are we saying about our monthly period? And what are we saying about ourselves as a modern country? This notion is only a stain and a blot on our claims to progressiveness and modernity.